And good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Now TV and Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Hey, here we are, July. My wife and I were talking about how rapidly this year has gone. I mean, here we are in the seventh month, and we just began. It's just, how does that happen? It's absolutely incredible. And the older I get, the faster it goes. But we keep on. We keep on. And because we're having fun. Okay. We have been focused on the challenge of Christ. You remember what that is? Jesus said, John chapter 10, verse 37, "If I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me." That included not only his resurrection from the dead, but it included the fact that he was to come again in the first century in judgment, his parousia, the kingdom, and resurrection. If he did not do that, ladies and gentlemen, he is not the Son of God. If he did not do that, then he failed his own challenge. And so for the last 2 years, I've been sharing with you how historically the church has failed, and I might say failed miserably in meeting the challenge of an atheistic, unbelieving, skeptical world. And that challenge from the unbelieving world is not going away. Now, here it is, July 2021. In February of 2022, I am tentatively scheduled to meet a man in formal YouTube debate or internet debate. Not sure it'll be on YouTube. I'm sure it'll be posted there, though. Anyway, who says that he was at one time a minister in the Churches of Christ. Well, the Churches of Christ is my background. I was raised as a fifth generation member of the Churches of Christ. But he says, he soon realized from studying the scripture that Jesus failed. Jesus gave an entire series of what this gentleman calls broken promises. Therefore, the entire story of the Bible is false. Jesus is not the Son of God. We have no hope of salvation of or from anything. You know, I think Paul said it very, very well. If in this life only we have hope, we're of all men most miserable. He's talking about Christians. Paul was basically saying, why in the world? And as a matter of fact, he says it right there in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 30 and following. If in this life only we have hope, we have all men most miserable. Why then, he says, did we face the lions? Why then are we at peril every day? What Paul was saying is, we have taken the name of Christ. We are living for Christ, and for that we are ostracized by our friends, by our neighbors, by society. Society hates us. And does American society hate Christians right now or not? I'm not saying this is fulfillment of prophecy by any stretch of the imagination. I'm simply saying that just as Jesus said, I did not come into the world to judge the world, but men love darkness more than they hate or more than they love the light. In other words, if you choose the path of light, if you choose the path of right, morality, decency, integrity, honesty, the world's going to hate you. That wasn't for a first century generation only. That wasn't true of the Jews only. That concept, men love darkness more than they love light, is a historical, may I use the term, eternal, unchanging principle. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I have been sharing with you over the last 2 years, it is absolutely imperative that as believers in Jesus Christ, we be able to answer the challenge of Christ. We must be able to respond to answer, and to refute the skeptics, the atheists, the Muslims, the Jews. May I even say the apostates. Those who have left the faith because they wrongly believe that Jesus made broken promises. I hope these lessons are helping you in your walk. I hope they are equipping you to be able to answer the skeptics. Because I want to tell you something. And I say this with respect to all three of the futurist views, because good, honest, and sincere people belong to all three futurist views. But because they're good people, because they love the Lord, doesn't make them right. Not one single one of the futurist views can answer the challenge of Christ. Not one of the three futurist views. Doesn't matter if it's dispensational premillennialism, historic premillennialism, amillennialism, or postmillennialism. Not one of them can answer the challenges from the skeptics without doing all sorts of theological gymnastics or verbal gymnastics. Not one. Only covenant eschatology, only the full preterist view offers the genuine biblical as well as historical solution and answer to the challenge of Christ. Now, we've covered an awful lot of territory, and we've come to the book of Revelation. And the reason we've come to the book of Revelation is because all three futurist views of eschatology wind up going to the book of Revelation to try to prove their eschatology. Not only that, the enemies of Christ like to go to the book of Revelation, and of course they like to impose their own Western, Occidental world views onto the apocalyptic Hebraic language of the book of Revelation, basically saying, well, I know what it means, even though I've never studied Hebraic apocalyptic language, even though I'm not familiar with the Old Testament background of the imagery that is there, and even though the book tells me that it is a book of symbols and signs and figurative language, I'm going to take it literally. And that means it failed. Amazing. So, we are several videos into it by now, an examination of the book of Revelation. And as I promise you, I'm not going to try to do a verse-by-verse study of the book of Revelation. I am doing what I am calling a thematic exposition of the apocalypse. I am taking different themes, different subjects, different topics from the book of Revelation and examining them somewhat in depth to demonstrate that the modern futurist views are false, and secondly, to demonstrate that the only proper explanation of these themes, these motifs, these subjects, is in fact the full preterist view. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not going to try to do a verse by verse. I'm doing thematic. And if you want, you'll excuse this, shameless plug here, but if you want an absolutely fantastic thematic study of the book of Revelation, then get a copy of my book, Who is This Babylon? And I got to share a real quick anecdote with you here, folks. Not long ago, I was in a Facebook discussion with an individual. And this individual said, and let me back up a little bit here. This individual kept asking me questions, theoretically associated with eschatology. But I could read between the lines and realize that this person's ultimate goal was try to entrap me on the issue of the Sabbath day. And look, folks, I've been in this circus for a long, long time. I can generally spot an ulterior motive, an ulterior question about a mile away. And so after we had gone back and forth, ostensibly on eschatology, I informed this individual that her questions were not going to solve the dilemma and was not going to entrap me on the subject of the Sabbath. And this individual wrote back and said, I'm not here to discuss the Sabbath. I'm here to discuss eschatology. To which I responded, you can't study eschatology. Now, mind you, I used to believe you could, but I now do not believe you can study eschatology without studying the Sabbath. They are so interwoven, so interlocked with each other. Why is that? Well, because all of God's Sabbath days were types and shadows of the good things about to come. Colossians chapter 2, verses 14 to 16. According to the entire universal and unanimous consensus of rabbinic writers, the seventh-day Sabbath foreshadowed the eternal salvation. It foreshadowed the resurrection, the kingdom, the new creation. So when you study the Sabbath, in effect, you are studying about the new creation. You are studying about resurrection. You are studying about the eternal rest of salvation. So I pointed out to this individual that their attempt to dichotomize between eschatology and the Sabbath was futile, because the end game, the consummate fulfillment, the eschatological goal was salvation, the kingdom, the new creation, resurrection. Now, if you've done any study whatsoever in the subject of Sabbath, you know this is true. It was therefore shocking to me when this individual said, I want to study eschatology, not the Sabbath. And they were even repeated a couple of different times. I'm not here to discuss the Sabbath. I'm here to discuss eschatology. And I finally managed to make the point. The second coming of Christ would be to bring salvation. Sabbath foreshadowed salvation. Therefore, a study of eschatology, a study of the second coming, is a study of the Sabbath. And very quickly, real quickly, I don't want to get going on this, but boy, it's one of my very favorite subjects. If you believe that we currently have salvation in Christ, if you believe that we are new creation in Christ, if you believe the kingdom has come, if you believe the atonement has been made, then the Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath, has been fulfilled. And the seventh-day Sabbath is no longer binding. we don't keep the seventh-day Sabbath in anticipation of salvation, the kingdom, resurrection, the new creation. We don't keep the Sabbath to look forward to those things. We have the body of which the Sabbath was a shadow. Okay, enough on that. I told you, I could get wrapped up in this, I could get ginning on it really, really fast, but I got to hurry here. So, this thematic study in my book, Who is This Babylon? It is a thematic and not quite, but almost a chapter by chapter examination and study of the book of Revelation. Furthermore, I have produced a 13 lesson MP3 study series and it's entitled Revelation 101. Now, both of these are, economically priced. If you go to my website, you can even download the Revelation 101 series very, very economically. And if you go to my website, DonKPreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and if you order the book, Who is This Babylon? And if you make mention of the fact that you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook even, or if you saw the offer on Now TV, I'll refund your shipping. That'll save you $5. Okay, I've got to hurry. So one of the themes that we have been developing over the last few weeks is the fact, Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him to show to his servants the things which must shortly come to pass. And I've been sharing with you that the Greek term that is translated as shortly, intakai, simply does not mean, as many commentators try to make it mean, does not mean rapidly but not imminently. I've got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I have encountered literally hundreds of people who tried to make it say, Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, to make the text say, these things must come to pass rapidly when they finally get around to starting to happen. That is not the force of the Greek language. That is not what the Greek language means. It doesn't mean rapidly when it finally starts. Intakai is only used a few times in the New Testament. We've examined each one of those times. Please go back into the previous week's videos here on Now TV and watch those videos as I examine each of the contexts where intakai is used. And I demonstrate it simply does not mean rapidly, not imminently. It doesn't mean that. And so what that means is the Father was telling John to tell the churches, actually telling Jesus to tell John to tell the churches, these things are about to happen. Now, mind you, here's something very important. Revelation chapter 1, verse 19. John was told to write the things which have been. Write about things that are past. Well, okay, the things that are past. They are not to come to pass shortly, right? The things that are already there, are not to come to pass shortly because they're already there. Only the things that were, as the literal Greek renders it, about to come, only those things that were future to John, but which were about to come, were the things which were to come shortly, meaning soon, imminently. And for the last couple of weeks, I have shared a very special study with you about the dangers of trying to mitigate God's language of imminence. As you well know, I'm sure, it is so very common for people to say, well, I know it says these things must surely come to pass and the time is at hand, Revelation 1 verse 3. But after all, God doesn't think in time like we do. God doesn't talk in time like we do. Well, I want to tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, and I say this with all due respect. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm not trying to be unkind, but I must say that argument is absolutely ridiculous. Hey, look, I tried making the argument for years. I really did. But when I examined how the Bible uses time statements, I soon came to realize that won't hold up. That argument backfires really, really quickly. What I found out in my systematic study of all the time statements in the Bible was that God tells time just like you and I do. Not only does he tell time just like you and I do, he expects you and me to understand his time statements in the same way that you and I would understand quickly, shortly, at hand, soon, and very, very little while. He expects us to understand what those words mean and to act upon those words in the way that normal human beings would act upon those words. Okay, so that's a whole lot of background, whole lot of refreshment over the last several weeks. But I shared with you Luke chapter 21 and verse 8. Remember, the disciples have asked, in response to Jesus' prediction of the destruction of the temple and the city, tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming, the parousia, and the end of the age? Jesus then gives his apostles a warning. And he says, don't let anyone deceive you. Many will come in my name saying, I am he, and the time has drawn near. Now, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to develop this even more when we come to Revelation chapter 1 and verse 3. Okay? But the word, when Jesus said that the false teachers were going to come saying, the time has drawn near, the word time there is kairos, meaning appointed time. The divinely appointed time. So, Jesus was warning his apostles about false teachers who were going to come saying, the end is drawn near. Well, now, wait a minute. At some point of time, right? At some point of time, somebody has got to be right in saying the time has drawn near. But Houston, we got a problem. Beginning in the 2nd century, and especially with a group by the name of the Montanist, Montanist, the Montanists began saying that the end has drawn near. Their generation was going to see the descent of the new Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven. The end was near. The time had drawn near. That was in the 2nd century. And virtually every single generation from that time to the present time, every generation has had its, quote, prophecy experts that have said, the end is drawn near. This is the generation. Hey, look, I remember the 1960s very clearly, and all the predictions that the end was going to come very, very soon. I remember the 70s and the flurry of Hal Lindsey and the late great Planet Earth. I remember the 80s, 1980s, countdown to Armageddon. I remember Hal Lindsey saying, you know what? Jesus said, learn this parable of the fig tree. When the fig tree puts out its figs, you know that summer is nigh. Even at the door, the fig tree is Israel. Israel was restored, i.e. the fig tree put forth its leaves. In 1948, a generation is 40 years. Therefore, 1988 is the time. Well, I don't have to tell you. The rapture didn't come. The end of the world didn't come. The man of sin did not come. The great tribulation did not come. The mark of the beast did not come. Not one single thing that Hal Lindsey said came to pass. So what did Hal Lindsey do? Hal Lindsey came out with another book saying, well, you see, many Bible prophecy teachers, he didn't say himself, many Bible prophecy teachers tell us that a generation is 40 years, but that's false. See, he realized, but he wasn't going to admit that he made a false prediction. He simply said, some Bible prophecy teachers tell us the generation is 40 years. Oh, they're wrong. They're wrong. Well, Mr. Lindsey, you were wrong. But he said a generation is actually 125 years. Well, that's absolutely, utterly false. It's ridiculous. It has no biblical merit to it whatsoever. But that, you see, by making that change of tactic, that means that Mr. Lindsey can keep making his predictions and not be held accountable for his false prophecies. Now, next week, I'm going to dig deeply into Luke chapter 21 and verse 28. And I'm going to show you the only generation that did not make a false prediction was the first century. See you there.